Hello everyone. This week we are getting specifically into the literature studies portion of the course. The essays this week and next from English Studies do an excellent job of presenting an overview of literature and the place of theory in English departments. These essays, as well as the Damrosch introduction, give background and history, and they explain debates, although they do not tell us what we should do. The two online articles from the New Republic assigned next week are arguments, with the two authors very definitely taking sides. For me, the essays from English Studies were helpful in getting me to reflect upon the purpose of teaching literature, and more specifically, the purpose of teaching world literature. My primary role is teacher, so usually most of my research and scholarship dovetails back into the classroom. I selected the Damrosch introduction because it is an example of one kind of research that I do these days. No one trains to be a world literature professor, but that doesn't mean that I can't try to articulate some idea of what it is and how I teach it. Turning first to Richard Taylor's literature and literary criticism, the questions that intrigued me were, why do we study literature? Why is literature a required general education class? At the end of the essay, Taylor states that literature professors must answer these questions and defend the study of literature within their departments and the humanities. Overall, I agree with him that humanities scholars and professors need to be more vocal about the value of their disciplines. From my perspective, teaching literature falls under two purposes. One is university-wide as part of the general education requirements and goals for our liberal arts core curriculum. Last spring, I asked my general education students why they were required to take one semester of literature, but they could choose between theater, music, and art history for their other semester of culture-type classes. Why does our curriculum favor print text, reading and writing, over visual and performance art? One argument is that studying literature has a social benefit. Is it good for students? Does reading literature create empathy for others, for those different than ourselves? Will students learn what is called cultural intelligence, that is, cross-cultural or intercultural competence? These are the diversity and empathy skills that they need for the workplace. These are open questions for me. I try to engage students in answering these questions for themselves, but so much depends upon the individual student. The second way I teach literature is for English majors and minors within my department. The debates Taylor raises have come up in my department. For example, the shift to using text over literature, as well as the debate over teaching popular literature versus belletristic or traditional literature, have both been recurring conversations in my department. Next week, I think we will be delving more deeply into these two debates. For me, Taylor's questions about why we organize and study literature by nationality and time period are more interesting given my designation as the world literature person. Taylor reminds us that as an academic subject, this focus on national literatures is fairly recent, occurring in the past century. He also reminds us that it is connected to nationalism and political goals. The political need to preserve and teach a national cultural tradition, for example, is directly tied to the creation of American studies during the Cold War. Similarly, British literature began to be taught as such when the British began colonizing the world and exporting their culture and educational system. For me, the question is, can we organize and categorize literature differently in a way that is not tied to national and time period organizations? Are there alternatives? What would they look like? Again, these are open questions I grapple with. My background in Caribbean literature and post-colonial studies makes me comparative in the sense that I am not limited to a certain time period, nor am I limited to any one national tradition. For example, this fall I am teaching a majors course on narratives of colonization, conquest, and piracy, from Columbus to the early 18th century. Next spring, I'm teaching immigrant literature focusing on Hispanic fiction from the late 20th century on. I do not define American as the United States. For me, it is the entire hemisphere. For me, American literature is world literature. The problem, though, as Damrosch's introduction explores, is how do we clarify what we mean by world literature? I have found his broad definition helpful. World literature circulates beyond its country of origin and/or its language of origin, and it must be read as literature. I appreciate his focus on reading and teaching world literature. He is more concerned with how we read and interpret this literature than in coming up with rigid rules. He also asks important questions that articulate my struggles in the classroom. Number one, how is a work of literature transformed by leaving its culture of origin and being read elsewhere? How does a literary work manifest itself differently abroad? 2. Which authors and texts get to circulate outside their homes? Which ones are translated? Whose voices are heard? 3. How do readers impose their own cultural values upon literature from other cultures? Here Damrosch explores the danger of reading in the mode of the colonizer or imperialist, one-dimensionally seeing the literature in terms of difference from self. And 4. In what ways do we encounter a text, a foreign text? We notice a difference, which can be a novelty, a similarity that is reassuring, and a middle of like but not like, which is where we change and learn. And finally, number 5, what do we do with global English? English as a legacy of British colonization, U.S. imperialism, and global capitalism. In both my Gen Ed and my majors classes, I can use these questions to structure the course and to engage the students in the process of reading and examining themselves as readers. There are a lot of other complex, interesting ideas in this essay about the status of literature as a commodity in the global market, the perils of translation and transculturation, but I would like to leave them for you to draw out in your discussions. I have also provided links to David Damrosch on Blackboard. He is a professor at Harvard and director of their Institute of World Literature. I would also recommend Googling cultural intelligence and seeing the wide range of hits that you get. I think discussing these skills in my Gen Ed classes will help students to see the connections between studying world literature while preparing for their careers.